Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to our 2021 Iditarod coverage here on Dogworks Radio. You can hear all of our episodes over on KVRF 89.7 in the Mat-Su Valley, radiofreepalmer.org. And you can find us on social media by searching Dogworks Radio. This is our wrap-up show. We have been on the air, I think this is day 13, day 12, day 13. They're all running together now, but we're excited to be here. We have a heck of a lot of stuff to talk about. But before I bring my two co-hosts on, I have a little bit of business that I want to talk about. First off, I don't know if you know this, if you're listening for the first time, but we are the only year-round mushing podcast that is also on a terrestrial, meaning old school radio station anywhere in the world. And that is an awesome, awesome feat to do. And we've been there for 11 years now. So like I said, we're over on KVRF. I know a lot of radio stations do race coverage like the KNOM in Nome and the radio station in Glen Allen, etc., but they do not do a weekly podcast. Also coming up in just a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about where a lot of these dogs go after they have done races like the Iditarod and other distance races. We're going to talk to Jake Way. We talked a little bit about his kennel the other night, Chili Sled Dogs, which is in Minnesota. So we're going to talk all about what happens to these retired sled dogs, and it's going to be a great conversation with Jake. I think he's been on the show 3 or 4 times. And starting next week, we have a really special 3-part series. We're going to cover Rock On Racing, which is an entire family of mushers. This is their rookie year. They got into mushing just this year. And we're going to talk to Matt Randall, Casey Randall, and their 2 kids, Addie Ann and Thale. It's going to be a great series. Every one of them raced in a big race this year, including qualifiers like the Yukon or the Willow 300 and the Copper Basin, as well as the Willow Junior 100. And lastly, in terms of our news, if you would please, if you've been listening to us all of these days, please leave us a review. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, anywhere you like. Anything helps, and that helps us with our rankings. So I have both co-hosts on tonight, calling in from Kenai, Alaska, Tony Ryder, and calling in from California, Alex Stein. Tony, how's it going tonight?
Not too bad. It's starting to feel like spring down here. Definitely the roads are wet, not icy. So I think Iditarod's over. Alaska seems to think so anyway.
Yeah, spring is in the air for sure. And Alex, how are things down in California?
Things are great. I was watching the last 2 teams come in early this morning and was just remembering that a few years ago, one of my friends in Los Angeles, who is also a big Iditarod fan, called me. And this was when the winner was going to come in the middle of the night. And she was like, let's find a 24-hour cafe that's open that we can go and like watch this streaming on a laptop. And we were unable to find a place that was open. But I think about those things. I think about, finishes and things that I've watched online every time the Iditarod ends.
Yeah, I remember you telling that story, and it's an entirely different world now, but hopefully next year we can be back at it, whether we're partying in Nome or finding one of those 24-hour cafes to watch the finish with our friends for sure. So we have a lot to cover tonight. The first thing that we're going to cover is, we always talk about this on this show, and that is the story of the Widow's Lamp and the Red Lantern. They're 2 separate things, except this year they're a little bit one and the same. What can you tell us about it, Alex?
So the widow's lamp, traditionally, when the race goes to Nome, there is a lantern that is lit at the beginning of the race and hung on the burled arch. And it stays there lit until the last team comes in. And then as part of the ceremony, when the last team comes in, they take this widow's lamp down and the last musher extinguishes it. And that's always something that I've found very specific to dog sled racing and very cool and really quite moving. And it goes back to the tradition of having lamps in the windows of Alaskan roadhouses so that people could find their way there in the dark. And it's a way of making sure that anyone who is on the trail gets to come in safely. And that is different in every other year. It's different from the Red Lantern, which is literally a red lantern that is awarded as a prize to the last musher who comes in. And when the race finishes in Nome, a lot of times the red lantern, the physical lantern, will actually be given to the last musher as they come up off the ice, so that when they pass under the burled arch, they already have this red lantern with them. So this year, there was no widow's lamp hanging in the in Deshka Landing, where they had erected a sort of wooden area to indicate where the start and finish was. And I thought that they were not going to do any sort of ceremony with the widow's lamp, but what they decided to do was to light the red lantern. And so they had it lit a few minutes before the last two teams came in, and then they presented it to Victoria Hardwick, and she extinguished it, and they announced that this year that the red lantern and the widow's lamp were the same physical lamp, and so they extinguished that red lantern flame to indicate the end of Iditarod.
And the Red Lantern winner this year, Victoria Hardwick and Dakota Schlossler, did something kind of cool. I guess they stopped together just around the corner from the finish and had one of them catch up to each other, then ran in together literally within just a couple of seconds of each other. And I didn't get a chance to see that on the video feed, but that really shows the camaraderie of Iditarod. And these two guys and gal, traveled a lot of the trail together. Tony, do you know anything else about that story?
Not really. I mean, they basically, it sounds like towards the last few days, they were really encouraging each other and making sure that they made it to the finish. Victoria said that she was having a hard time keeping awake, as we talked about the other night. Sleep deprivation is a big deal on the trail, and she even ran into the back of his sled a couple of times. But it's one of those things where I think it just is one of those Iditarod classic stories of this is more than just a dog race. This is more than just a race. The encouragement and just kind of the team effort to just cross that finish line is so important to so many.
I agree. And go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say the other interesting thing is there's something that happens when you're watching the tracker, the GPS tracker, and teams are very close, which is that sometimes the trackers don't ping at the same rate. So you'll have one person who seems to be like maybe a mile ahead, but their tracker hasn't pinned in 5 minutes. And then the other team, their tracker pinged like 2 minutes ago. So when they're that close, it's very hard to tell just by looking at the tracker data exactly where someone is. And I assumed that there would be, I knew that they were close, but I assumed when they came in that there would be really one would be behind the other. But when they came up the chute, they were literally both almost exactly even. And, the dog teams are fairly long, even though they both only had 10 dogs in harness, but that's a significant length. So Dakota's dogs crossed the finish line first, but I believe before his second line of dogs, or maybe third line of dogs, had crossed, Victoria's first dogs were crossed. So crossed the finish line. So it was, aside from the 1 second finish at the front of the pack in the 1970s, this is as close as you can get.
It is. And we talk a lot about the Red Lantern, and for most mushers on the trail, whether it's in the Iditarod or any other race, this is not an award you necessarily want to receive. Obviously, it means you came in last, but there's also a big celebratory aspect to this. And so much so that once you are awarded it, it's almost like a badge of honor. There's a guy that lives here in Willow, and I see him all the time when I go to the post office. On his dog truck, he has a sign, one of those magnetic signs that says his name. Then it says Red Lantern winner, 1980 something. So he is very proud about having that Red Lantern, and it's definitely a cool award if you have to have it. Alex, just one more thing on the Red Lantern. It is a very celebrated award, especially in Nome. Tell us a little bit about the extra banquet that they typically have if the Red Lantern finisher is not there, and how most of the mushers that are still in Nome come out to greet them. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So there's a tradition where if a musher comes in during the banquet, and of course we haven't had finishers banquets in the last 2 years, but hopefully next year we will be back to that. But if a team comes in during the banquet, and the banquet is typically held Sunday evening, late afternoon, evening, and if a team comes in, the tradition is everybody leaves the banquet and they go to the Burled Arch to welcome the musher in, which is very, very cool. Now, as the race has gotten quicker, it's been the case more often than not in the last 11 years or so that everyone is finished before the banquet, or almost everyone is finished before the banquet. But in the times before that happened, they would have a separate banquet called the Red Lantern Banquet, which would be a second finisher's banquet for any musher who had come in after the regular banquet.
And if my memory holds true, wasn't it Cindy Abbott that got the second banquet the last time? Is that right?
I don't know if she got one. I know that she came in the middle of the banquet.
Okay.
So I'm not exactly sure.
Gotcha. All right, so let's move on here. This is a very important story. I know Alex posted this first thing this morning, and he always says he doesn't want to jinx this because it's one of his big superstitions. What is that, Alex?
So I have one superstition with Iditarod, which is that I never talk about the year, the race as it's going on, if there aren't any dog deaths. I don't want to jinx it. I'm a little bit like people feel like you shouldn't mention no-hitters to pitchers who have no-hitters going. So that's something that I'm very, very, very superstitious about. And this year, I am very happy to say we did not have any dog deaths. And it used to be before, I think the first year that there were 0 dog deaths was 2010. And before that, there were always a few dogs who would die. And obviously anytime a dog dies, it's sad and it's horrible and it's something that nobody wants. And what has happened is there's been a lot of research into why these dogs were dying. And Karen Ramstead at one point had one of her top leaders who died during a race, and her fans raised some money to fund some research. And one of the things that the research found out is that a lot of these dogs die of conditions exacerbated by stomach ulcers. And it turns out that basically the way you can prevent this is to essentially give the dogs a variation on Pepcid AC. So essentially giving them a little bit of antacid. And once that started being done on a widespread basis, the number of dog deaths plummeted. And then we had a bunch of years in a row where there were 0 dog deaths. And obviously that's something that everybody wants. In the years since 2010, there have been a couple of years where dogs have died. But I think that the goal at this point is always to have 0 dog deaths, if there is any way to prevent it. And I've got to just give a big shout out to Stu Nelson, who is the chief veterinarian, who I think is really I say this every year, I think he's the unsung hero of Iditarod. And he has an amazing group of trail vets and vet techs who do thousands of on-trail examinations of the dogs, and sometimes they do emergency surgery on dogs if that is needed, and they really do just everything in their power to take care of these dogs and make sure that these dogs are all okay. And this year we had a lot of dogs who were sick. There was a lot of stomach issues with the dogs, but I am so happy that we had 0 dog deaths again this year.
And one more point on that, Alex, in terms of averages, that can occur, but this year, were there 45 mushers that originally started? Is that right?
47.
47. 47. So over 650 dogs were out on the trail this year, and none of them, of course, died. But most of them made it up and down the trail very successfully. Now, of course, there were a lot of dogs that were dropped, but that's a pretty good number when you have that many dogs out there with no major problems. Do you agree, Tony?
Oh, definitely. This is something that has been the goal of Iditarod from pretty much the very beginning. It was, how do we do this to ensure not just the safety, but the well-being and the care of the dogs. I was actually at Iditarod headquarters after everybody finished, and Stu was back in Anchorage when he announced to all of the Anchorage volunteers that there had been no dog deaths on the trail for the first time in Iditarod. And just the emotion that he had, it was overwhelming, I think, for everybody in the room, just to know that not only did the vets and the mushers do everything to take care of the health of the dogs, but there were no freak accidents. There were no moose on the trail that decided to become homicidal. There were no crashes with snow machines. And that every year that we have that, that's just what I immediately go back to, is just the look of pride and excitement on Stu's face when he announced that we finally got there. We were so close the last few years, and now we're finally here. And that's something that just, I'm like, Alex, we were actually talking about it last night as the last two were still coming in. And I was like, I'm not going to say it, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So it's just a really, really good feeling. You never want to talk about the possibility, and you never want to jinx it either. So.
Right. Tony, you started off our coverage this year talking about volunteering, and one of the most coveted and important jobs in terms of volunteers is the dog drop spot, whether it's downtown at the lakefront or even over at the women's prison. I don't think that they did that this year or last because of COVID, but that's a really important job with the volunteers. Can you just talk about that just for a minute, about what they do and how important that volunteer job is?
Sure. I can kind of give the basics. I've actually never worked at Dog Drop. I've visited, but I've never actually worked there. Basically, when the dogs are returned from the trail, after their musher has essentially benched them for either an illness, a soreness, or just because the dog doesn't seem to want to go any further, they get returned to Anchorage. And then from there, they are returned to the handlers for their kennel. But in the meantime, they have to be taken care of while they wait for transport home. So you have volunteers and vets there to basically spoil these dogs rotten. They get lots of snacks. They get lots of love. They're very sad that they aren't with their normal pack. A lot of them, we saw on the Squentinel live cam the other day, this one dog just would not let it go, that he did not get to keep going and was just howling and so sad. And so when they're there in Anchorage, at least, they know how to get the attention of the workers, and the workers are there just to basically love on them and let them know that they did such a great job, and that, they'll get to go home soon, and then they'll get to go on another adventure. So yeah, it's a very coveted spot. If I lived up in Anchorage, I would definitely sign up for that, just because, doggy snuggles. So.
And Alex, can you touch just a bit on the prison program that they have? That is for dogs, I believe, for people that aren't able to come and get them right away. Say that the handlers are in Fairbanks or whatever and have to drive down. They go over to the women's prison. Is that right?
Right. So usually what happens is they will keep the dogs there until sometime in the evening, and then if the dogs can't be picked up that night, or they can't be picked up until the next morning, they'll go over to this minimum security women's prison, which is just outside of Anchorage. I'm not sure if it's technically I'm not sure technically if it's within the Anchorage borders or what, but it's right near Muldoon, basically, if people are familiar with Anchorage. And they're the prisoners who have been trained for this get to take care of the dogs. And as with the volunteers at the lakefront, that's a very coveted thing. And I have read interviews with the warden there who says that this is a very great and positive experience for the inmates as well, because they get to prove that they are responsible, and they get to basically love on these dogs. So that's pretty cool. And then when that happens, the handlers will come and get them from the prison the next day.
Very good. So let's now switch gears a little bit and talk about the prizes. We've been talking about this the last couple of days, but Alex, you have some updated information. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of the trail prizes that we know about. There will be a bunch of other prizes that will be announced, judging from last year, probably in the next week or so. And that includes the Humanitarian Award, the Leonard Seppala Award, the Checkpoint of the Year Award, although it's strange. I'm not sure if they're going to give that out this year, since they largely have been avoiding the villages, but perhaps there's something there as well. But these are the trail awards that we know about. The Alaska Air Transit Spirit of Iditarod Award goes to the first musher into McGrath, and this year that was Dallas Seavey, and he won handmade mittens and a handmade hat And so that's a very prestigious award. The first musher to Iditarod this year was Brent Sass, so he won the GCI Dorothy Page Halfway Award, and that is $3,000 in gold nuggets or a smartphone with a year of free GCI service. And we made fun of them a little bit because it's not, they don't specify what kind of smartphone it is, but I have to say that every year GCI does a really amazing job in making sure that the checkpoints are basically wired for high-speed internet, which is used not only by the race but also by mushers who come in and want to communicate or anything like that, and also reporters. Although this year there were not really very many reporters out on the trail. The first musher to the Yukon Award this year went to the first musher who got to Ophir, and that's the 5-course gourmet meal prepared by the chefs at the Lakefront, or actually the Millennium. It used to be the Lakefront, and I still think of it as the Lakefront.
No, it used to be the Millennium. Now it's the Lakefront.
Oh, okay. I get the name changes confused. Anyway, so the chef at the Lakefront will prepare this 5-course gourmet meal. In the past, when people have been able to travel up and down the trail, there was also, they would go up and prepare it on a cook stove and serve it out at that checkpoint. This year they didn't do that. So there's that, and an after-dinner mint, which is $3,500 in $1 bills, and a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne, and that also was won by Dallas. The Bristol Bay Native Corporation Fish First Award this year was presented to the first musher to Roan, and that is 25 pounds of salmon, $2,000, and a piece of native art, which is a wood-burned art piece. And this year, Aaron Burmeister won that. The Ryanair Gold Coast Award this year was the first to Rainy Pass, and that's $1,000 in gold nuggets and an ivory carved figurine of a dog sled with a dog team in front of it. And Dallas CV won that. And Dallas also won the Northram Bank Achieve More Award, which this year was the first team to get to Skwetna on the return, so what they're calling Skwetna South. And usually that is given to the first team that gets into White Mountain, and that is $2,500 and a special trophy that resides at Iditarod headquarters year-round. So they get the trophy, and then it's taken away and put in the headquarters. And the other field trail award is Chad Stoddard, who won the Rookie of the Year. He finished in 23rd place, and he gets $2,000 and also gets a trophy that he doesn't get to keep because it gets kept at the Iditarod headquarters.
And then we have the Golden Harness Award that is bestowed on a couple of Dallas's dogs, and of course what we just talked about, the Red Lantern Award as well. But I think the biggest award of all is the championship. Dallas CV, 5th time Iditarod champion. I think that is something that definitely has to be commended for sure. So let's move over to one of my favorite segments on our wrap-up show, and that is our favorite story of this year's Iditarod. And when we first started this, we knew that it was not going to be a normal year in terms of the amount of stories that came out from the trail, because there's not a lot of reporters. Folks aren't flying to and fro on the airplanes like they normally do. But there was still quite a few, and I wrote them all down. But what I like to do is have each of us tell their favorite. And since Tony is our co-host for the first year here on our coverage, I'm going to have her go first. Tony, what is your favorite story of Iditarod. You can only pick one.
Okay. Well, I'm going to cheat just a little bit and just add to Alex's award. Dallas was the one that got the Lakefront First Musher to the Yukon Award. His dad, the year that he won that, they didn't sponsor that award that year, so he didn't get his 5-course meal and everything. So I think Dallas should take him on that. I just had to get that out there. So I doubt Dallas and Mitch listen, but if they do, Dallas, take your dad to dinner.
Tony, before you go, Tony, before you go there, is that the year that Scott Jansen did the award and put up the money? Do you know that, Tony, or do you know that, Alex?
Yes. He gave the cash part too. Yeah, he thought it was awful that here Mitch finally won that big award and he didn't get anything, so he gave him the money at least.
And the fun thing is that usually that money is just given in an envelope, but because it was Scott and because he is the mushing mortician, he presented it in a little miniature coffin. So he had this, I think it's $3,000 or $3,500 that was presented in a miniature coffin.
Yeah, I think it was $3,000 that year. So it just I saw that and I was like, and Dallas better take Mitch because that's just not fair. So.
Okay, so what's your favorite?
All right. My favorite has to be the Rainy Pass ponies, and not just because they're cute, but because that was just the most ridiculously Iditarod story ever. I feel like we have at least one or two every year that you're just like, that came out of left field. I had no expectation. I did not have ponies on my Iditarod bingo card. So just the image of having this champion Iditarod team laying on straw or hay, I'm sorry, and these horses coming up trying to steal the hay, and then the dogs getting upset and the horses getting upset and everybody freaking out. And meanwhile, Dallas just sitting there going, this is where I'm losing my title here. That to me, just, I don't know. I've been cracking up about it for 2 days. So that's my favorite story.
So the Rainy Pass ponies, Tony's ponies. I like that. Tony's ponies. Very good. Alex, what is yours? Hashtag. Yes, what is yours?
So I also enjoyed the ponies very much, but I knew that Tony was going to pick that as her favorite story. So I would have to say that my favorite story is also a bit of a goofy story, which is the incredible fame that was achieved by Dallas Stevie's sweater. And Dallas had this great sweater from Norway, and people started admiring it, and we talked about it a couple of times, and then the sweater got its own Twitter account and started tweeting about its adventures on the trail with Dallas, and that was just kind of a delightful thing in a year that feels like maybe we need a little bit more lighthearted stuff.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if you remember me saying, I hate sweaters, and I was looking online that day that story broke to try to find one of those fancy Norwegian sweaters, and we equated it to wearing your favorite player's jersey. So I think that whoever's knitting those sweaters, and by the way, you can find the pattern or whatever it's called for knitting online, and I think it's only about $8. So if you have a hankering for knitting wool sweaters, you can buy that pattern right online, and I know that that's somewhere on the Twitter feed. So both of those stories were my top two, guys, the ponies and the sweater. But I'm having a hard time now because you guys picked the ones I wanted, but you guys have the finger on the pulse of all the stories because you stay up 24 hours a day watching the feed. I would have to say that my best story is just the sheer tenacity that Iditarod had at the ability to put on the race with everything that was going on. So their COVID plan, their mitigation, their processes. I know that Alex and I talked about it on at least 2 episodes in the off season about what they were going to do, and we received a heck of a lot of flack for doing that on social media. I mean, we got blasted by one person in particular that is in the know with Iditarod, and he blasted us pretty good on Facebook or Twitter, and he kind of handed us our tails, as they say. But I think that's my story because we did it. Of course, we had Gunnar Johnson that had to be withdrawn because of COVID, but I assume that he's doing well. There hasn't been any reports that he's not, and everybody else. So 46 people plus all of the folks on the trail, the handlers and or not handlers, but volunteers and support staff and vets and checkers and everybody else made it through the whole thing without having any issues whatsoever. So guys that are listening, what was your favorite story on Iditarod? Please let us know on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. Some of the other stories that we kind of glossed over on this show, but Ryan Olson's dogs, those 2 dogs that they brought out to the finish. The new route was definitely a talked about story. Dallas's 5th championship, of course, is a huge story, and we touched on that. The new belt buckle, we talked about that last night. That's a pretty big story. I know Martin Booser posted a picture of his belt buckle today on Facebook. He showed his I believe it's 1980. Is that right? Or 1990, Alex?
It's something like that. Yeah, I think probably 90. Of
his first one, and then his companion one that he got today or whenever they gave those out. Of course, a huge story is the Ugly Dogs crew and everything that they do to promote this sport, as well as raising money for some really great causes. And also the story about Will Trasinski and him being the first trans man to finish Iditarod in this day and age. That is a very big accomplishment for sure. And I know Alex talked a lot about that the other day. But yeah, I think we can all agree that the biggest story of the year had to be the freaking ponies for sure. So let's move on. And I know that we're over. And for folks that are listening, remember, you will not hear this show again until next year. So do not turn off the podcast. The next one is another wrap-up story that we do every year, and that is our thoughts on the future of dog mushing. And I know Alex and I have done several shows about this, not only during our Iditarod coverage, but also in our off-season coverage as well. And we talk about climate change, sponsorships, the financial aspect of it, all of those sorts of things. Animal rights is always a big part of the future of mushing and all that can come with that. So what I want to do here is also ask each of us what they think about the future is. And then when Alex goes, he's going to share some of the information that he got from the Iditarod CEO when he talked to him here on Mushing Radio. So I'm going to have Tony go first. What are your thoughts? Where do you see mushing and Iditarod in 5 or maybe even 10 years, if we can forecast that long? Obviously, it's going to look much different than it does today in a myriad of reasons. But where do you see the sport in, 2026 or 2031, if we can forecast that far?
I think it's easier to kind of forecast the 5 years out, because even with the climate change, even if they have to redo the science of the sleds or whatnot, there's a way to get to know them. We've been, historically, dog mushing wasn't just in the wintertime. The dogs were helping haul all year round during the gold rush. So the idea that this has to be on snow, isn't necessarily what needs to happen. When I first started working at a kennel, it was dry land in the summertime, and the dogs did just fine doing exactly what they do in the wintertime, even hauling the same race blood. So it's not something that I think we would necessarily see go away. It would look very different physically. I think there's still probably a way to get across the rivers and get up the coast and get to Nome to even keep that race going. It would be a step back in speed, I would assume. But I don't see the spirit of Iditarod going away anytime soon. It may not look like the race that I grew up with, but then again, it doesn't look like the race that I grew up with now. So I do believe that mushing will be here for a very long time. Look at how many kennels now have tours that are very successful year round, not just in the summertime when the cruise ships come up. I don't see it going away. I don't see the lifestyle going away quite as fast as some of the groups that are at best misguided and at worst malicious for reasons of they don't enjoy happiness. I don't know. But I don't understand why you don't like the idea that humans and dogs are bonded. I don't get that. But there's that. I'm not normally an optimist. I'm very much a realist. But when it comes to Iditarod, and I don't know if it's just because it's my race as an Alaskan and as someone who grew up with family involved in the race, as volunteers, never as mushers. We're not that cool. We like showers and sleep. But we, I don't want to say that we won't have it in 10 years I want to believe that we're not only going to have a 50th race, but we're going to have a 75th race. Whether or not it looks like what we're talking about today, that remains to be seen.
And is your primary motivation with that climate change then?
Oh, maybe. It's one of those things. It's so hard to judge, what the future on that even holds. I mean, there's talk that, we may not be able to reverse it or see the winters that we have, but I don't know. It's just one of those things where if there's a low snow year, there's a low snow year and we can do it. But this year there was a crap ton of snow. So can I say that?
Yep, you can say that. Okay, very, very good. Okay, so I'm gonna go second because I want to hear what Alex has to say from Mr. Urbach to end this segment. I'm also very much the realist, like Tony is, and I'm also a dog musher, so I'm out there all the time on sleds, and I've been doing it since 1994, so quite a while, and I've seen big changes in particular with climate change and the snow and how races are run and whatnot. So I think that the biggest change that we're going to see is, like Tony said, something that has to do with climate change, whether it's moving the race up into either February or potentially January, depending on what's happening. But also, we talk to mushers on our other show that my friend KP and I do called The Dog Driver, and we talk to mushers all over the world. And most of these guys are either sprint or stage mushers, and we ask them almost on every show, where do they see the sport of mushing in 10 or 15 years? And by and large, they all say that it's going to look much, much different in the future because of climate change. And these guys, some of them have been around since the 60s that's been running dogs. So they all are very concerned about climate change and the amount of snow and the ability to do that. Secondly, I think financial aspect of mushing is going to get very difficult as we move forward, especially if we continue down this COVID path. I think sponsorships are going to be much different than we see now. We see that locally with some of our sprint and mid-distance races, with the ability to get sponsorships when businesses don't know if they're going to be open in 6 months. So that's very difficult to forecast. Especially with larger companies. We saw just in this last year several big sponsors pull out of Iditarod. Jack Daniels, Coca-Cola, I can't think of the others that have decided to pull out of the Jeep dealership, to name one major sponsor in terms of prize money. And of course, a lot of the much smaller sponsors and individual sponsors for the individual teams, I'm sure, is much tougher to come by. And with that, the ability to raise money to race, not only to enter Iditarod, but also to take care of your dogs effectively throughout the year. If sponsorships are tougher or work isn't there, like we've seen the last couple of years, this year and last with COVID and the inability to have tours and things, especially with the cruise ships, that can be a big deal for a lot of dog teams. And then thirdly, I think whether we want to recognize it or not, I think that the animal rights folks will continue to have their claws in the sport. There's been a couple of really high-profile seizures in the last couple of months, in particular in Canada, and I don't want to gloss over that, and I don't want to gloss it over to our listeners, but it is a real thing, and as a mushing community, we need to stand together and react to that. However you do that, please do that professionally, because that is what's going to help the sport. But also on that front, we have a very strong community now, not only the mushing community itself, as mushers and as that community, but also with a very robust online social media community that we've talked about over the last few years that really is the future of mushing. And then lastly, technology. How will things change, whether it's communication on the trail or sleds or other gear, or potentially even the dogs? How will the dogs change? We've seen the big, burly, beefy, husky type dogs, the Siberian looking dogs, to a much different looking dog today than we saw even when I started mushing about 30-ish years ago. So those are my thoughts. Alex, what are your thoughts first, and then what did Rob have to say?
So I agree with both of you that climate change is a huge thing. Alaska is sort of on the cutting edge of climate change, and you can see it. You can see it there, and it is not only that there isn't as much snow, but it's also things like lakes not freezing up as early, or temperatures going way down and then going up above freezing. And that can cause all sorts of different conditions and changes to the trail. So I think that is going to be a huge factor. But I also agree with Tony that there are, we've seen races where there has been essentially no snow in portions of the trail. And so I think that it is definitely possible to run those races under those conditions. And I also agree with Tony that if there is, a year or several years where there is substantially less snow, that is probably going to change the race and slow it down a little, and maybe change how sleds are constructed and how mushers run and what specifically they're doing technically. So I am totally in agreement with you guys about all of that. I think for a race like Iditarod, Iditarod is at a bit of a crossroads right now. And I think that there is a number of different ways that it can go. And the way I hope it goes is that the race will really move more into the social media age, and will really embrace technology and use technology to grow the fan base and to attract more people who are interested in the sport. We've sort of been in this holding period, I feel like, for Iditarod for a number of years, where it's the same fan base that the race is going back to over and over again for financial support and for just interest. And that's not a good long-term strategy, especially for a race that is facing challenges like losing some sponsors and challenges caused by climate change. So, I feel like I've said this maybe the past couple of years, but I really would love to see Iditarod have a totally new media strategy where they are really going after a new audience, because I feel like that audience is there. They're just not being reached. And part of the reason I feel like that audience is there is I look at communities like the Ugly Dogs, who just have come in and brought so much energy with them. And, part of it is that also people who've been around the race for a long time and people who are big fans of the race, they sometimes tend to look down upon the newbies and the people who don't know as much and the people who maybe ask questions that they consider dumb. But the fact of the matter is, all of us were newbies at one point. Maybe not Tony because she was born into it, but all of us, at one point didn't really understand this race and were asking the same kind of questions. So, yeah, we need to make sure that the people who've been fans for a long time stay engaged and stay involved. But at the same time, we need to throw this open and be really embracing of new fans and find ways to reach them. So that's sort of my take on the future of it. I think it's very possible to do that, and I hope that the Iditarod does. I fear that if they don't, that the race is going to decline within the next 4 or 5 years. So I'm very, very hopeful and optimistic about that. As far as what Rob said about it, he mentioned that they were looking into possibly moving the race up a little bit, perhaps into February, when there might be colder temperatures and possibly better trails. There's also been some discussion of some course changes that might help to mitigate some of the climate change effects. And it's very. I feel that Rob sort of came into the Iditarod and then was hit by COVID, and like that sort of took over and ate most of last year's race. And then this year was, more about figuring out how do we even do a race and how do we mitigate against this. So in a way, I kind of feel like his first 2 races as the head of Iditarod, we're so different and abnormal that it's hard to make any kind of judgments about it. I do think that he is a very smart and very capable guy. So I'm optimistic about what he's going to do, and really feel in a certain way that the race next year is going to essentially be his first race. But luckily, he's also been doing it for 2 years now, so he's much more familiar with it, much more familiar with all of the moving parts of it. And also, next year is the 50th running of Iditarod. And just as I believe that the last year has been really hard on people, a lot of people have been, stuck at home or in some sort of lockdown or modified lockdown for most of the year. And I sense a tremendous pent-up demand for things like traveling and going to movies and seeing concerts and plays. And just as there's a pent-up demand for that, I think there could be such a pent-up demand for people to come to an event like Iditarod.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that next year is going to be just a tremendous event, and I am already looking forward to it.
One final point on Rob Urbach. You had mentioned that this is only a second year coming into this, and you also talked about sort of the old guard changing in sort of Iditarod leadership, and some of that was even put upon because of what was happening with Dallas Seavey and the doping allegations and all of that sort of stuff. But back to Rob, he comes from a very different background than a lot of the folks that have been involved with Iditarod for many years. He comes from the United States Triathlon Association. So he's very familiar with putting on big events and holding big organizations. Of course, they do things like the Ironman series and all of that. So he has some really good, I guess, street cred, if you want to call it that. And I think he brings that breath of fresh air that, as a dog musher, I really like to see. You never want the same people making all the decisions all the time. That never leads well. So I hope he does well. I hope he stays around for a while and really gets to see his ideas come to fruition. Okay, guys, we have 2 quick segments left before we close our show. We did this the other night, but we always do it on our last show, and that's to give out some shout outs or thanks. And I'm going to go first this time. Then we'll have Alex, and then we'll end with Tony. First off, I want to thank every single person that listened. We have, as of the time we started hitting record, 112,964 downloads. That is amazing. Folks really came out and listened to us, I think, more than any before, and that does not include places like the radio station or YouTube, which we had several thousand people and listen and comment, good, bad, or indifferent, over on YouTube. So a heck of a lot of people found us this year, listened to us, shared it, retweeted it, commented, told stories, told their friends. That's what a podcast is all about building a community. I've been doing this for 12 years, and for some reason I still like sitting behind this mic. My big shout out goes out to a couple of our friends that have been listening to us a long time. Alex knows the first one that I'm going to talk about, Patty and her husband. They live in California, and they are dedicated fans. They listen to us every night and always give us a word of encouragement, and they've been with us since the very beginning. And also a friend of ours, Deb, who found us the last few years and is a big supporter of ours and does a heck of a lot of commenting and sharing as well. So I want to give out shout outs to those folks. So let's go with Alex. Who is your big shout out?
So I want to give a special shout out to all of the people on Twitter, all of the people on Musher Twitter, and the Ugly Dogs and Will's fans, the Buddy Brigade. It has been so great and so much fun interacting with you guys. It always is, but especially this year. And I also wanted to mention, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but I didn't, so I can combine this maybe with a shout out. Our pal Meredith Mapes, who is a Iditarod veteran and also a vet tech, said on Twitter that the widow's lamp that hangs in Nome belongs to Mike Owens, who is an Iditarod board member and lives in Nome. So I just wanted to mention that. Meredith is an amazing follow, and if you don't follow her on Twitter, you should. She's always got like great nuggets about racing and about volunteering, and this year she was doing some of the remote comms work as well, and just a great person and a wonderful Twitter follow.
And Tony, bringing up the end of our thanks, who do you have?
Well, I think Alex got me back for taking the pony story earlier, because he took all of what I was thinking I was going to say. But I do want to give a shout out to a few of the Ugly Dogs who pretty much kind of like blackmailed me into not like backing out of this opportunity to be with you guys this year. I know I was gone a few times, but you need to talk to my boss about that. I would have been on those nights. But I do want to give a shout out again. I said it earlier, but Sasha, definitely one of the most encouraging Twitter followers and listeners that there ever has been. But also, I don't know her real name, but reblog us on Twitter. She is probably one of the biggest supporters. She's retweeting just about anything and everything that we've posted as the podcast. So she's like a one-man, I don't know, street team or something. So just a shout out to Kathy and like Alex said, the Ugly Dogs, the Buddy Brigade. They've been so great this year and encouraging at least Alex and my addiction of Iditarod. So I guess that's a good thing.
All right. So I'm sure your fans would love to know, Tony, are you going to be back with us before? Are you going to be back with us next year?
Yeah, you know, I think if you guys aren't tired of listening to me ramble, I'm definitely on board for next year. I don't know what that will look like schedule-wise. I'm thinking I might be up in Nome, so it'll really depend on logistics. But I have every intention of hanging out with you guys again next year.
Well, that just means we'll have to send you some field gear so you can get some on the spot interviews, and maybe we'll all.
Oh no!
maybe we'll all three be there. I'm sure Alex is thinking about coming up for the start, and
that would be amazing.
And maybe he'll just stay the week and a half or whatever it is to the finish. I know he's done that before. All right, Alex, we're about ready to end the show here. We do not have a featured musher, but you want to do a quick update or at least a kind of a retrospective about Allie Zirkle. What do you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to say Allie Zirkle, and we've said this before, but it bears saying again, just an amazing ambassador for the sport. 20-time Iditarod finisher. She has won the Leonard Seppala Humanitarian Award 5 times. There's 1 year where it just says humanitarian. I'm not sure if that's the same award or if it's different. And, you know, I just remember meeting Allie and talking to her and interviewing her a couple of times and just being struck by how engaged she is, how like she takes the time to really interact with every fan. I've seen her with like groups of little girls who just kind of adore her. She is, as Tony said, she's in that kind of Susan Butcher mode where she is, you know, someone who is admired and looked up to, and just a great role model. She and her husband Alan Moore have said that she is not going to change her mind about coming back and running another Iditarod. And you know, whether she does or not, I think we all just, people who have followed her and people who are fans of the sport, we want her to first of all get better. You know, and she's still suffering the results of these injuries that she had. So we just want her to get better. If she decides she wants to come back, that's fine. A lot of people would love that. But if she doesn't, that's okay, because she has given this sport already so much. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I just think the world of her as a competitor, as a musher, and as a person. And so I had planned that I was going to do a musher profile on her at some point during the race, and then all of this happened. So, but I just wanted to say a little bit about that. And also I found out looking at her website, and I think this is just really cool, that she bought the house that she's living in now. she bought that with the prize money that she won when she won the Yukon Quest. So that's pretty great.
Wow, that's a cool story. I did not know about that for sure. Alex, anything else before we end our coverage?
Well, we're running late, so I'm not going to reveal all of the nasty rumors and innuendo that have been told to me over the past 10 years about various mushers. So, no, I want to thank you again, Robert. I want to thank Tony. This year, I've been thinking a lot about, people always say that, or mushers often will say that mushing is sort of a metaphor for life, and you have to take things as they come, and you have to have a plan but be able to change things. That's never entirely resonated with me, but it really has this year. And I do just want to say one more time that all of these people, all of these 47 people who got to the starting line are just amazing. And the fact that the race was able to be run this year is wonderful. And the fact that it wasn't derailed, and the COVID plan, even though I think it probably had some flaws, was able to hold and keep people safe. That's really great. And I am just such an admirer of all of these people who mush at any level, from the recreational mushers to the Dallas Seavies of the world. And it's pretty great.
Tony, any final words?
This has just been really fun. I'm very thankful that Alex kept begging until I said yes, I'd come on as a guest person on your podcast, and then you guys said I needed to come back. So I'm very thankful that you gave me the opportunity, and I've really enjoyed it. It's made Iditarod just a little more fun to watch because, like Alex said, it felt different and the excitement wasn't necessarily there when we started, but it was Iditarod, and the race did it. They did it better than I think most of us expected, and I'm very sad that it's over, and I'm going to start crying because what else are we going to talk about now? But I just can't wait for next year. I think it's going to be so exciting, not just because of the anniversary, but because it just feels hopeful that we're going to be back to something of what normalcy was before all of this. So, yeah, I've had fun. Thanks, guys.
Excellent. And my parting words here is Tony told us this morning on social media, 100-day countdown until the volunteer picnic. That for folks that are new, that's when mushers can sign up for next year's race. It happens in June. And remember, I've said this on the coverage before, Iditarod and mushing is now a year-long sport. We talk about it all the time here on the show, and of course they talk about it all the time on social media. And again, I want to give a thanks out to you guys for doing this. Alex, thanks for hanging in with me for all of these years. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you each March doing this. We've had some great times together on this show for sure. And Tony, thank you very much for joining us on here. It was fun to have a new perspective. It's always good to hear other people's stories when they're on here as well. And lastly, as we end this show, Alex, how do folks find you on social media?
People can find me, the best way is on Twitter, and I am at Coldfoot Films.
Okay. And Tony?
I'm easily found on both Twitter and Instagram as at TonyShellAK. Actually, I think Instagram, you drop the AK now that I think of it. You can also find me on my blog. Some of our listeners asked if I would give that address out on here because I guess they're listening where we don't have the link. And that's TonyShell.blogspot.com.
Very good. And you can find me at Robert Forto, that's Forto, or the podcast feed is at Dogworks Radio, and you can find those two handles on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, all of those, you can find me right there. So it is a pleasure to have these guys on the show, and we will be back next March, but we'll do plenty of shows in between. And with that, we say goodbye and see you guys next year. Thank you.
From DogWorks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for DogWorks Radio.